Happy birthday, Adam State, on your 100th anniversary. Happy birthday, Adam Sade, on your 100th anniversary.
Please be seated. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out for this memorial service. It is a joy, bittersweet, to see all of you gathered here today for the memorial service. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. It is in the spirit of the preacher, the voice of Ecclesiastes, that we gather here to commemorate and celebrate the life of Dr. John Edgar McDaniel, professor emeritus, teacher, scholar, mentor, colleague and friend, indefatigable supporter of Adams State. In the following minutes, we may shed a few tears, and we'll perhaps share a hearty laugh as we recall and rejoice over our various connections with John, the only child of John E. McDaniel Sr. and Vivian Randolph McDaniel. To his final days, John was shaped by his parents' Texas influence, especially in forming some of John's Texas sayings. But he was also shaped by other cultural and religious influences, those of his paternal grandmother, whom he always denominated Grandmother McDaniel. When John disobeyed her, which allegedly was rare, she would have him cut a cedar switch, which she would then apply to bring him up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The long-term effects of her efforts are debatable to those of us who knew John in his subsequent years. During the Great Depression, Grandmother McDaniel took John regularly to the congregation of the Lord's Church, which met in Decatur, Wise County, Texas, where he committed these words of the 23rd Psalm to memory. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Lord is my shepherd, I have everything that I need. He lets me rest in meadows green, and leads me beside the quiet stream. He keeps on giving life to me, and helps me to do what honors him the most. Even when walking through the dark valley of death, I will never be afraid, for he is close beside me, guiding all the way. He spreads a feast before me. In the presence of my enemies, he welcomes me as his special guest, with blessings overflowing. His goodness and unfailing kindness shall be with me all of my life, and afterward I will live with him forever. In his home, forever in his home. Thank you so much, Autumn. There is intent in the madness of the two renditions of the 23rd Psalm. The aesthetics of text, trope, or tale, whether expressed through prose, poetry, opera, sculpture, painting, cinema, or even gardening, shaped John's outlook throughout his life. He created a cross-listed course at Adams State, both in English and in philosophy. He entitled the course Interrelations of the Arts, which the Adams State catalog described as an examination of the ways in which the fine arts are interrelated, with particular attention given to the differing treatment of important literary, musical, and artistic themes. Autumn and I have just demonstrated how familiar texts like Psalm 23 could be read and then reworked and sung, shaping how it is understood and experienced through the different tenses. Think, too, Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story, or all the ways the legend of Don Juan Tenorio has been presented, reworked, and reinterpreted by Molière, to Mozart, to Lord Byron, to Gaston Leroux, and even Andrew Lloyd Webber. John used Don Juan as the theme the last time he taught Interrelations of the Arts. John was, of course, an historian by training and profession, and he became a historian in part out of a love of politics and the legislative process. But mostly, and especially in his academic beginnings, he studied the past to understand the context in which artistic expression occurred, persisted, and changed across time. It was the love of the human aesthetic that deeply undergirded his teaching and provided the intellectual source of his captivating enthusiasm, a mental and expressive vigor that inspired students, that built and sustained friendships. We're shortly to hear, through testimonials of John's dear friends and former students, how his love of aesthetics and his mastery of history engaged, enlarged, and invigorated their own perspectives, encouraging and inspiring them to see their own ne plus ultra, their idealized and ultimate potential, and not just to glimpse potential, but to realize it, and to do it with mirth, irony, and introspection. His humor and grace, and his occasional acerbic corrective of bear's butt, rendered his professional practice at once humane and entirely human. James Daniel Johnson, would you please share your story?
Thank you, Dr. Crowther, and I'm positive I cannot live up to that introduction. I'm very much overwhelmed by this experience, so I will be brief. For more than 20 years, Dr. John has been a mentor, a best friend, and a father figure for me. He has been the most important person in my entire life, and no words can possibly describe how much I miss him. I have an amazing speech about all the adventures we used to have and all the amazing conversations that we enjoyed together. Being able to experience Wagner's Ring at the Met with someone who truly loved it will always be the highlight of my entire life. Instead, I would like to say how my great story began here. All I did was sit in the back row of American government and earn an A on every test. Apparently, that is not the usual way things work, as it immediately brought me to Dr. John's attention, and he asked me to be an usher at commencement. When I arrived, I went to the wrong building, this building, and almost turned around and went home. That one decision, the fact that I didn't leave, changed both of our lives for the better. I became his last work-study student, and when his adopted son passed away, it was natural for me to fill that role, just as he became more than a father to me. The idea that one decision or relationship can change your entire life is very much apparent here at Adams State. This is a place where anyone can truly change their destiny and where lifelong friendships are forged. You never know when or where it might happen, so always be paying attention. I spoke with Dr. John hours before he died, and the last thing I told him was how proud I was of him and how much I loved him. And without hesitation, the last thing he said to me was, "I love you, son." Nothing could make me more proud. I love you too, Dad, and I will always miss you. Goodbye, Dr. John.
Thank you so much, James Daniel. Rebecca Ford, please share your mother Vicky's story.
Thank you, Dr. Crowther and Adams State faculty and staff for inviting my mom, Vicky Ford, to pay tribute to Dr. John McDaniel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Ford. I'm Vicky Ford's daughter, and I will be reading the tribute that she wrote about her most beloved friend, mentor, and professor, as she couldn't be here in person for his celebration of life. A tribute to Dr. John E. McDaniel by Vicky Ford. Others will talk about Dr. John McDaniel's educational prowess, his guidance, and distinguished accomplishments. I, however, want to inject some love and humor into this celebration and let everyone know how much Dr. John was treasured by our family. When I began my education at Adams State College in the fall of 1968, I was encouraged to take the required American History Survey course for freshmen from Mr. John McDaniel. My advisor assured me that Mr. McDaniel knew his stuff and was an excellent teacher. That quarter, we were on the academic quarter system then, I enrolled in John's class, along with my fiancé, David Ford, and his brother, Doug. The next semester, David's youngest brother, Gene Ford, and his sister-in-law, Connie Ford, enrolled in the class, and suddenly, Mr. McDaniel had to contend with 4 Fords in his class. And yes, John McDaniel certainly did know his stuff about history and government. Mr. McDaniel was a dynamic lecturer, but all students were expected to participate in the class discussion. For some of the shy farm kids, this was a new experience, and they were understandably nervous. One quickly learned that non-participation in the discussion would result in a lower grade. There was additional reading, too, not just the textbook, and questions about those books would appear on his exams. Mr. McDaniel did not use multiple choice questions on his midterm and final exam tests, but instead, he wrote his exam questions in a blue book. I thought I was pretty proficient in writing, but when my first exam was returned, Mr. McDaniel had not only commented on the content of my answers, but he had also corrected my grammar in red ink. I was mortified and shocked when he handed my first exam book to me with red marks on every page. I quickly became more proficient in writing exams for his class. Mr. McDaniel taught a summer class entitled Western Movies in the 60s and 70s. It was very popular, as John knew every famous Western, the actors, the directors, etc., and as a bonus, the movies would be shown in class. The year that Midnight Cowboy debuted, David and I double dated with John and Miss McGee, a physical education teacher, so we could go see the very controversial movie. As you all know, Midnight Cowboy is certainly not a Western, but John's commentary about it afterwards was epic. He also insisted that we see The Last Picture Show in 1971. It reminded him of his upbringing in the tiny town of Coleman, Texas. And as we discussed the movie for hours afterward, it is some of my most favorite memories. As we progressed through college, Mr. McDaniel became Dr. McDaniel, and he also became a close friend and mentor to David and me. Through Dr. McDaniel, we met our lifelong friends, Carlos and Dorothy Lucero, and Jerry and Patty Creasy. Since John, at the time, had no children of his own, he adopted all of us and our children. We were honored to be considered his family. During our student years, we would be invited to Dr. John's little apartment, which was across the street from McDaniel Hall. He usually served lentil soup with Vienna sausages sliced into it. We thought it was very exotic, especially when served with the red wine of the time, Lancers or Mateus. When I went to the grocery store to buy lentils, I found that they were very inexpensive. So that's why they were on the menu at Dr. John's. Perhaps the reason John could afford to be so generous to the college was because of those many dinners featuring lentil soup and not beefsteak. And of course, there was always Dr. Pepper on hand, his favorite drink. After we had children, we would take the kids to visit Dr. John often at his big house in Monte Vista. They referred to him as Uncle John, and he always had homemade bread with butter ready for them. Dr. John was notorious for keeping his thermostat at 62 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we visited in the winter, we never removed our coats. One year, we were tasked with watering John's many houseplants when he was away for the holidays, probably in New York City watching an opera at the Met. The kids and I made many trips with the watering can up and down the stairs in the big house, hoping we didn't miss any plants. He had turned the thermostat even lower while he was gone, and even though we trekked all over the house in our winter coats, we were still cold. We loved John's witty Texas sayings, such as, "I'd rather be shot in the butt with thumbtacks." Or when he protested, he'd say, "Bear's butt." And then our favorite, "Hotter than little sister's kisses." After we finished college and started our own farming business, we developed a tradition of hosting New Year's Eve dinner at our various friends' houses. One year, Dr. John attended the gathering at our house and drank a little too much champagne, which for him was only one glass. When the party ended, John couldn't find his way out of farming country north of Center and back to Monte Vista. He ended up driving all the way to Del Norte before he realized where he was. We kidded him about that for years. Dr. John was with our family for every major event and at our house for many holiday dinners. In the fall of 1992, Dr. John called and announced that we were all going to go visit Egypt over Christmas, New Year's semester break. That was certainly news to David and I, but he had it all arranged. So we, along with our children, Ernie and Rebecca, Dr. John, Clyde Karstens, and John's 3 friends from Coleman, Texas, made the trip. Our family had such an adventure in Egypt and saw so many iconic places. We are forever grateful to John for insisting that we make the trip with him. A favorite activity with Dr. John came every summer when he invited us to watch the annual Sky High Stampede Parade from his front lawn in Monte Vista. Between my husband and John, what with their commentary about the parade participants and the jokes, we were all rolling on the lawn with laughter. Here are some endearments that my children remember about Dr. John. He had an infectious smile. They loved how he would laugh so hard that his whole body would just bob up and down. They loved that he would wear tennis shoes and jeans, a proper collared-down, button-down shirt with a blazer and a ball cap. Staying at his house while I was at golf league, the kids would sip sweet iced tea on the red stools in his kitchen while eating his homemade bread. Getting a piece of candy out of one of his beautiful antique cut glass dishes. Walking up the steps to his beautiful house and hearing opera music being piped throughout every room. Given permission to go to the special 3rd floor of his house to read books in the reading chairs and seeing his framed photo of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Marveling at the big staircase leading to his magical library room filled with volumes of books. The eloquence, intellect, and passion in his speech, especially when he was in deep conversation with my mom about music, opera, or politics. How he used to say, "Fun, fun, fun," super fast. And every year, without fail, the kids would get a box of chocolate-covered cherries for Christmas from John. Dr. John was truly one of a kind, and he will be greatly missed. But he lives on, stronger than ever, in our hearts. His tremendous generosity and love for all of us as a family and to Adams State will always remain with us, a guiding light to be good and do good as we continue to walk upon this earth. We are certain that he is telling a joke or two with the angels and teaching them some good old Texas sayings.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you so much, Vicki. I'll now read the testimonial from Dr. William Rakow, an Adams State alum and a member of our Adams State Foundation Board. Dr. Tanberg, honored guests, faculty, staff, family, and friends, I am honored today to be asked to offer a few words in memory of Dr. McDaniel. Dr. McDaniel was intelligent, kind, compassionate, and a true gentleman. This wonderful man appeared in my life and became an inspiration to me. When my father died my sophomore year, he took me under his wing. Dr. John looked out for me and became my intellectual mentor and friend. That moment in time will never fade for me because he gave of his time and talent to show me that he wasn't going to let me go without knowing that true inspiration comes from the spark of intellect fueled by the fire of emotion. That truth is an elusive paragon of virtue that can still be found, that it is best used for the betterment of all, for all time, a lesson often lost in translation and out of context. His gentle manner taught me to see the world through the eyes of those who climbed higher and saw further than most to the benefit of mankind. This inspiration led me on to my master's and doctorate degrees in my quest for higher insights in my field. This is Dr. McDaniel's legacy. This is the testament to a man who taught all of his students that one can see farther, see more, and learn more when sitting on the shoulders of giants. Dr. John was one of those giants. And I was honored to have experienced his greatness by being allowed to sit on his shoulders. Former student Dr. William Rakow, class of 1969. Thank you. Here's the testimonial from Dr. Gary W. Gallagher, emeritus director of the John L. Now Center for Civil War Studies at the University of Virginia. Some thoughts about Johnny McDaniel by Gary W. Gallagher. News of John's passing brought to mind a flood of memories of the PT 109 pen he often wore on his jacket, his deep roots in Texas, his vast knowledge about opera and about American politics, and his deep inquisitiveness. I thought about his unstinting generosity with me at a formative point in my life, and of his example of what it means to be a master teacher. I first met John when I began my freshman year at Adams State College in the fall of 1968. I had originally hoped to take U.S. History Survey from Professor Dwight Crowder, but Dwight advised me to enroll in John's section. He assured me that John was more focused on U.S. history and would be my best option. It was a splendid piece of advice that hugely influenced my career at Adams State and my choice of graduate schools. That initial quarter was a revelation to me. What I encountered in my class with John was an intoxicating blend of his knowledge, enthusiasm, and obvious engagement with the past. During the ensuing 4 years, I took 5 classes with him, studying American political history and diplomacy, traversing the colonial and federalist eras, and greatly expanding my historical horizons. I also spent untold hours talking with him about history and our mutual bibliophilic tendencies. I'd never met anyone who owned so many books. Floor-to-ceiling shelves created a happy impression of countless historical episodes and personalities waiting to be discovered. A supply of Dr. Peppers fueled our discussions, which always went too quickly and left me filled with ideas as well as titles of books I would try to add to my own modest library. It was John's passion that most impressed me for history, for teaching, and for books. I always looked to him as the kind of professor students deserve but all too often do not encounter. Specific moments stand out clearly across these many years. One day he set aside a class period to discuss a reading. Within minutes, it was clear none of us had read the book. His face quickly displayed frustration, and in a clipped, low voice he used when displeased, he said there was no reason to waste more time, and left the room. Some of the students probably breathed a sigh of relief. I never went to a discussion section again without having read the book. Another day he arrived in an upbeat mood, wearing a pair of new white slacks, and announced that he had finished his doctoral work at the University of Texas. He was henceforth Dr. McDaniel, having written a dissertation on the presidential election of 1888. By then, I knew that I also wanted to earn a PhD and to teach on the college level, which gave us yet another topic to address when we got together. That our interests did not quite align, mine remained in the Civil War era, his the Gilded Age, in no way diminished the liveliness and value of our conversations. John helped guide me toward the University of Texas, his graduate alma mater, and to continue my studies after I received my BA. After I'd been in Austin for some time, one of my professors at UT said his colleagues initially wondered whether a student from Adams State would be able to compete with those from Yale, Rice, and Berkeley, and other high-powered schools. He added that it soon became apparent that my classes at Adams State had prepared me extremely well in terms of both content and grasp of the historical literature. Someone on the faculty there said this professor really knew what they were doing. They did indeed, and for me, John was the most important of them. It gave me immense pleasure to be able to send him a copy of my dissertation and later to dedicate a book to him. Over time, John became much more than a treasured mentor. He became a dear friend, the kind you can see once a year and resume conversation as if no time had at all passed. Across several decades, we got together in the house in Monte Vista, a large and sturdy Victorian structure filled with books. The time always passed as quickly during those visits as it had when I was an undergraduate. I have no doubt that I will continue to summon recollections of details from my half-century of knowing John, and always with a sense of gratitude for the benefits of an enduring friendship. And now from Europe, we will hear the memoir of the Honorable Carlos Lucero, late of the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, and of course, most importantly, an Adams State alumnus. Dear friends of John McDaniel and Adams State, we gather today in person and in spirit to remember and honor the life of our dear friend John Edgar McDaniel. I met John some 56 years ago at Adams State College, Leon Memorial Hall. I know it wasn't 1968 because that was the year of the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. Dr. Fred Plotke, president of Adams State College, had arranged for a presidential election debate and asked John to represent the candidacy of Robert Kennedy and me to represent that of Eugene McCarthy. Dr. Plotke was to speak on behalf of Richard Nixon. The event promised to be a bit of a brouhaha, to be sure. In short order, the debate regressed into what I would call a candidate's ad hominem spat, in which I asserted Eugene McCarthy had been right from the start, that Robert Kennedy had come into the race only when opportunistic to do so. Fred Plotke claimed that Robert Kennedy was so unattractive that he had to wear makeup at his debate appearances. When it was John's turn, he suggested that Eugene McCarthy was not only clean Gene, but that he was so pure that one might better call him hygiene. As for Kennedy's appearance, John said that perhaps his candidate might wear makeup to improve his appearance, but nothing would help Nixon's appearance, not even the aid of a plastic surgeon. I had not met John before this very debate, but then I knew that this young professor wearing his PT 109 pen and I were going to be friends. Later that evening, when my wife Dorothy asked me how the debate had gone, I told her that I met a guy that was going to be our friend. Little did I know that I was correct about my characterization and that he was going to be a friend for the rest of our lives. Not much later, John and I got together to visit to compare notes. Interestingly, both of us had been in Washington at the time of the John F. Kennedy administration and assassination. John was working at the White House on congressional relations. I was attending law school and had a part-time position working for a U.S. Senate Judiciary Subcommittee. Our paths had not crossed, but our political interests were keenly joined. Our conversations became frequent, and before long, John was joining us for family dinner several times a month in our home overlooking the Rio Grande and the majestic Mount Blanca. Those were the days. Those were the days. We learned each other's individual histories and backgrounds. I experienced John's prodigious memory firsthand, not only about American and world history and world events, but his knowledge and memory of the smallest details of Texas history, including the fact that a creek near Coleman, Texas, bore my wife's middle name, Horde, and that it was named after the first territorial judge of Texas, Dorothy's great-great-grandfather. Early on, we were invited to spend Christmas with John at his family home in Coleman, met his lovely mother, and saw for ourselves where John got his singular sense of humor. It came from deep within his father's guffaw laughter. To John's dad, John was always just J.E. Dorothy and I attribute our love for classical opera to John. We had met another Adams State professor, Dr. Everett Estes, and his wife Cindy, who sung with the Minneapolis Opera when they were attending the University of Minnesota. All five of us conspired to form a dinner group at which we would study an opera each month. We began with Gaetano Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor. The talent was quite unbalanced. The Esteses could recall every note of the operatic musical themes and arias, but John could tell us the historical references in each opera, down to the royal heroes and heroines' lineage and where and when the opera was first performed, including the name of the opera house and no doubt the health of the conductor at the first performance. There was no bottom to his knowledge, but there was a limit. We provided the better food and learned that John was not much of a cook. He volunteered to bring garlic soup to one of our meals. This contribution was raw garlic cloves that had not even been peeled, and he had to ask Cindy Estes if she had a pot and chicken stock that he could borrow, whereupon Cindy volunteered to cook the soup. It was quite the thing in those days to list the community events in the Alamosa Valley Courier, and to avoid sounding elitist, we decided to name our select group of five the Rio Grande Yacht Club, with regrets to John for revealing our secret. It kept the community wondering what the club was, and we declined to identify ourselves as the culprits, quite content to keep it private. Only later did we decide that we would invite Jack and Nita Cooper to join us. It was all pretty silly, but we much enjoyed our private joke. It was also through John that we met Jerry and Patty Creasy and David and Vicki Ford. I asked Dorothy what her favorite memory of John was. She recalled that early on when our family went on a one-month vacation, John agreed to house sit for us. Dorothy gave John explicit instructions of how to care for her flower garden. John performed his gardening duties admirably. He brought the geraniums to full bloom, nothing died, everything flourished, including John's newfound talent as a gardener. He enjoyed gardening for the rest of his life. If any of you have had the pleasure of sitting in John's garden and getting a tour of the various varieties of flora of the valley, you can attribute it in no small part to that caretaking experience. As for Carla, our daughter, from whom I also solicited her fondest memories of John, she added the afternoon ring of the doorbell, almost always around 5 p.m. That invariably was followed by an invitation and ensuing family dinner with Dr. John, sort of like Thoreau and the Emersons. In the early days, John was living in the since demolished faculty housing near the president's home on campus. A young professor at the ASC Art School, Rocky Sapp, later at the University of Arkansas and the University of Georgia, was living nearby. John and I were out for a walk and stopped by to say hi. Rocky was working on the sculpture of a human bust. John was admiring a litter of puppies that belonged to Rocky. Never at a loss for word, Rocky said to John, "I'll give you one of those puppies if you can tell me who this sculpture represents." "I do believe that is Thomas Hart Benton," said John. "I'll be damned," said Rocky. "You're right." John declined the gift of the puppy. In due course, John was tenured and decided it was time to settle down. He sought my uncompensated advice on a strategy to get the best price on a house that he loved in Monte Vista. I suggested to John that he could not get the best price unless he was willing to take the risk of having someone swoop in and buy it out from under him. He took the risk. He got the house. It became his beloved home and garden for the rest of his life. One of his neighbors announced, John proudly told us, "We don't know who is moving next door, but we heard he's a bachelor professor with 1,000,000 books." Life is an enigma. At the moment of the Big Bang, at the moment of the creation of a star, I'm told by Dr. Mountain that modern-day spectrometric analysis conducted by the Hubble and James Webb telescopes reveals that the matter created at that instant contains all the essential elements of life, sort of like a big multivitamin of dust. The only thing that separates us humans from that cosmic dust is spirit and soul. My friend John had all those elements, plus the very spirit and soul that made him who he was. Our friendship was symbiotic. I asked our mutual friend, Dr. Ed Crowther, if he would please arrange to have the bells of Leon Memorial Tower tolled today. Those bells were to toll in memory of John McDaniel. They toll for us. They toll for the hundreds of students whose lives John has enriched and will continue to enrich. They toll for this great institution, Adams State University, that has lost one of its greatest professors and contributors. Collectively, we, all of us, are diminished by the loss of our great friend. May his memory and spirit live on. May he rest in peace. Carlos F. Lucero, June 10th, 2023. Thank you, Dr. Lipke. As you heard from the testimonials of John's former students and dear companions, Dr. McDaniel inspired and continuously supported their efforts in moving successfully through life, especially during the years of late adolescence and early adulthood. He was absolutely proud of their achievements, demonstrated most recently in his complete satisfaction with the selection of his former student, David Tanberg, as interim president and then president of Adams State University. As many of you recall, John served as faculty marshal from 1995 to 2007, where he presided over the commencement ceremony. Among his duties was introducing the Adams State president. In that spirit, deploying John's idiom in my own voice, I now have the solemn duty and high honor of introducing the president of Adams State University, Dr. David Tanberg.
I don't know that I've ever felt more inadequate to speak to a group or to speak about an individual than I do now. The testimonials that have come before me have been so eloquent, so beautiful, and so touching. And the man, Dr. John McDaniel, so huge in my life and in my memory, it's hard to imagine that I can express proper words or proper thoughts. I have heard and I've expressed many times that Adams State was indeed tremendously lucky to have a man like Dr. McDaniel, someone with his training, experience, knowledge, and wisdom. That is absolutely true, and I fundamentally believe it. But I also believe that that inadequately describes John and does not give Dr. McDaniel the credit that he's fully due. Let me explain. Adams State, at this time, about 50% of our undergraduate students are first-generation students. A near majority are Pell Grant students, meaning they're low income. For so many of our students, they come to Adams State with a hope and a dream, but with fear in their hearts that it won't be realized. At so many other institutions, a student enters and knows full well of where they're going to end up, whether it's a financier on Wall Street, getting an excellent clerkship, whatever it may be, they have full confidence. Most of our students, they come to Adams State with unrealized potential. Let's think on that. Dr. McDaniel, who could have taught at any university in the country or world, chose Adams State. I believe he did that because of a confluence of beliefs and values. And it's reflected in his life, right? He was not guaranteed success. And yet he realized it, and I have no doubt it was because of the intervention of specific people throughout his life. And you see it in his choice of early profession in politics and policy, where he endeavored through those mechanisms to make the world a better place, to provide opportunity, to improve the public good. And at some point, he made the decision that that was best accomplished one-on-one. And from the religious tradition I come from, we call it ministering to the one. And Dr. McDaniel saw in Adams State the very best place where he could provide opportunity, expand horizons, provide mobility, and help unrealized potential be realized. That speaks much better to the character of John McDaniel than saying we were lucky to have him, even though that's 100% true. This past week, I had the opportunity to speak at the Adams State Educators Hall of Fame. I said to choose education for your profession means pursuing a higher purpose, a career with a deeper meaning. I recalled individual teachers who saw beyond our faults and planted seeds that would impact and expand our minds. An amazing teacher can change the course of students' lives. Dr. John McDaniel was exactly that kind of professor. I took a number of classes with Dr. McDaniel when I was a student. It was immediately clear that his greatest joy was teaching. He personified the ideal professor. In fact, I think it was his identity. He invested himself in the academic enterprise and his engagements with students. If you were to imagine the ideal Hollywood professor, I think we would all envision Dr. John McDaniel. He lived the Socratic method, enjoyed the back and forth discussions, productive critiques, and lively debates. When I think of a professor, I picture Dr. John in his tweed jacket and the sparkle in his eye as he charged the class to question who did more for the Republic, Jefferson or Adams? Or during his time in France, was Ben Franklin merely a partier? It was obvious he enjoyed himself 100%. In fact, as I have reflected on Dr. John since his passing, what has come to mind most frequently was the sparkle in his eye before he told a witty joke. As he laughed, you always knew it was coming before it came because of the expression on his face, the sparkle in his eye, and that sideways smile that he would get. That image just keeps coming back more than any other. I recall as a student, I stopped by his office frequently. He loved engaging with students outside the classroom, particularly in his office, and especially if you showed an interest in history or politics, or really any aspect of academics. He would give back to your curiosity 3 times. He took a real interest in me as a student and as a person, not only in his class, but beyond it. His investment in me cannot be exaggerated, as it influenced my future success as a student, a professor, and now as president of Adams State. When I became a recipient of a McDaniel scholarship, I was able to move out of my garage attic space, where in only one spot in the room, if you could call it a room, could I stand up straight if I bent my neck. In fact, I learned from his closest friend, confidant, and colleague, Dr. Ed Crowther, that my suspicions were always correct. Dr. John was very concerned about students' material well-being, and that was the genesis of the McDaniel Scholarship Program. He cared that they were safe and secure, that they had enough to eat, and his financial contributions made sure that many of us could turn our attentions wholly to our studies. Indeed, since its inception, nearly 30 years ago, the McDaniel Scholarship Program has grown to include 39 annual awards. He has contributed approximately $1 million to students over these years. His decease does not terminate this contribution. Through his McDaniel Living Trust, his generous support of Adams State students will live on far into the future. In addition, he created the McDaniel Fellows Program, which places 10 students a year in community and campus employment. Think privately funded work study, where they gain practical experience to equip them with vital workplace experiences. Dr. John did not arrive at his concern for the practical needs of students by accident. I believe if asked, Dr. John would admit to identifying with the Adams State student population. He came from humble beginnings. His father worked hard and demonstrated integrity and honesty as an employee of the Farm Security Administration in the 1930s, which helped him succeed later as an insurance agent in the 1940s, as his community in Central Texas had already experienced his trustworthiness. Those values, integrity and honesty, were obviously instilled in the man we all respected and loved. A first-generation college student, John earned his undergraduate and master's degrees from Texas Christian University. The signed photos of JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson in the pre-ceremony slideshow date from this time, from his time working as a congressional liaison in the Kennedy White House. After Dr. John left Harvard to help elect President John F. Kennedy in 1960, later he was chief of staff to the Oregon Congressman Al Ullman. Fortunately for Adams State, fate intervened, and John left politics and returned to Texas and received his doctorate degree in history from the University of Texas. When he joined the Adams State faculty in 1967, his impact on students was immediate. You've already heard stories from some of his early students, including Dr. Rucko, Vicky Ford, and Dr. Gallagher. But how amazing is that? As a new, young professor, Dr. McDaniel was already and immediately incredibly inspirational, helping them see beyond their own potential and the myriad of opportunities they might embrace to build a better world. Until recently, I was under the assumption that the oil discovered on Texas land owned by the McDaniel family funded John's vision for Adams State. This was not correct. As an only child, he was the sole heir to his parents' estate, although it was substantial, and not mainly because of the oil fields. It did not suddenly project Dr. McDaniel into a world of high finance and extravagance. Rather, he invested his parents' estate and his own savings, living more modestly than most imagined, so that the interest on the investments could fund the scholarships. He then arranged with Adams State to retire, although he still taught for 7 more years, living on his para pension with his salary, in effect, augmenting his interest earnings to support student scholarships. I'm setting the record straight for a couple of reasons. To show how a child of Depression-era parents never forgot his roots, and how a Fulbright scholar who studied at the University of Strasbourg chose a small, state-funded, rural liberal arts college to begin and end his professional career. How an opera aficionado who served his country as an officer in the U.S. Air Force invited students to his home for picnics and stimulating conversation. How a nature and garden enthusiast traveled throughout the world, loved Dr. Pepper and good old Texas barbecue. How this man, Dr. John McDaniel, poured his ultimate passion for learning and history into the classroom. His guidepost was always his students and their success. Not just a memorize and test success, not a learn from me and parrot back my opinions, but a true educator, a highly intellectual man who could motivate students with little prospect on paper to become president of a university. Although I take great comfort in the fact that Dr. John lived to see me in the Adams State president office, and that he contributed in a very significant way to that accomplishment, I will miss him. I will miss seeing him enter my office with a smile and his funny little chuckle over a clever witticism or remark. His joy in this institution's growth and his belief in me. I will carry that trust as I lead Adams State into the future, as Dr. McDaniel was instrumental in my foundation to continue launching great stories.
Thank you, President Tanberg. Just a few items, but they are important, so please take notes. There could be on your next exam. Number 1, we will shortly recess from Richardson Hall, and I invite you to linger at the memorial tables in the foyer, and then you may proceed to the South Lawn for barbecue and Dr. Pepper. Number 2, over the summer, we'll be conducting yard sales and estate sales at John's residence, 405 2nd Avenue in Monte Vista. The first sale occurs Friday, June 23rd, and we'll publish more information about these events, and the proceeds go toward funding the McDaniel Scholarship Program at Adams State. Here's the point. Please attend and mostly, please buy lots of stuff. Shortly, Dr. Lipke will play the recessional music, J. Unger's haunting Ashokan farewell. But please allow Dr. Tanberg and me to recess first, and then proceed after we leave out of the auditorium, lingering if you so desire at the memorial tables, and then join us for Dr. Pepper and barbecue. Number 4. Decades ago, John asked me to preside over his memorial service at Adams State. He requested a reading of Psalm 23. He wanted me somehow, some way, subtly, somehow, to make reference to the congregations of the Church of Christ in Decatur and Coleman, Texas. And he insisted that I sing in the sweet by and by. He revisited these requests occasionally in subsequent years, but much more often after the stroke he suffered on September 20th, 2020. Fortunately, his wish for the singing of Sanford Fillmore Bennett's familiar hymn, In the Sweet By and By, will be rendered even sweeter and more delectable by the voice of Autumn Yoakum and the stellar accompaniment of Dr. William Lipke.
We shall meet on that beautiful shore.